Look at this. It's a fork. But what if I told you that for centuries this was seen as unmanly, evil, and a literal insult to God? I am not kidding. For hundreds of years, if you used this, you could be publicly shamed by the church and roasted by all your friends. It sounds insane, but it's 100% true. For hundreds of years, using a fork was a sign that you were a foreign weirdo. Society viciously rejected this thing, thinking it was going to destroy their entire identity. This is so much more than cutlery. It's an insane story about fear, power, and religion. So today, we're going to find out, why did Europe hate the fork?
To understand the craziness, you have to see what the world was like before forks. It was wild. For most of history, the dinner table was a totally different world. You had a spoon for soup, a knife you used for everything, and that's it. You used your hands. And they didn't think this was gross. It was just how it worked. In fact, they had a ton of rules about it. People were taught exactly which fingers to use so you didn't look greedy. Everyone would just reach into the same giant plate of food with their bare hands. They saw their hands as a gift from God, your own personal 10-pronged forks. The idea of putting a gadget between you and your food was unthinkable. So when this thing showed up to crash the party, people completely lost their minds.
The fork's first massive scandal happened in Venice around the year 1004. A Byzantine princess, Maria Argyropolina, came to marry the son of the Venetian leader. At her wedding feast, while everyone else was eating with their hands, she did something that left them speechless. She pulled out a tiny, two-pronged golden fork. Her servants cut her food into little pieces, and she speared them with her fork, refusing to touch her food. The local church leaders freaked out. One super important guy, a theologian named Peter Damian, publicly attacked her for it. He declared, God in his wisdom has provided man with natural forks, his fingers. Therefore, it is an insult to him to substitute artificial metal forks for them when eating. To the church, her fork wasn't just a fancy tool, it was a symbol of pure evil and foreign corruption. And the story gets even crazier. A few years later, Maria died in a plague. Peter Damian used this to deliver the final blow. He claimed her horrible death was God's punishment for being so arrogant and using a fork. That story spread across Europe like wildfire, and for centuries, people believed the fork was a tool of sin. Many even thought its prongs looked just like the devil's pitchfork, making it literally an instrument of evil. If people weren't calling the fork sinful, they were calling it unmanly. For centuries, especially in places like England, the fork was seen as hilariously feminine. Real men, they argued, weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. They ate with their fingers and a knife. It felt direct, honest, and masculine. This was a huge deal in England. A traveler named Thomas Coriat came back from a trip to Italy in the early 1600s and would not stop talking about how amazing forks were. He explained that Italians couldn't stand food touched by dirty fingers. He started using a fork himself, and back home he was mercilessly roasted for it. He was given sarcastic nicknames and was made fun of in plays as a total poser. The French court was also mocked for using their little forked instruments. Critics described the nobles looking ridiculous, chasing peas around their plates with these clumsy two-pronged tools. Using a fork was a sign you thought you were better than everyone else, and people hated it. So with all this hate, how did the fork survive? The answer is one word: pasta. You heard me? Pasta saved the fork. While the princess story gave the fork a terrible reputation, Italian nobles were actually curious. At first, they didn't even use it to bring food to their mouths. They just used it to hold meat steady while cutting it, or to pick up sticky food from a big serving bowl. It was just a gadget to keep their fancy clothes clean. But as eating long, saucy spaghetti became more and more popular, they had a huge problem. Have you ever tried to eat spaghetti with just your fingers? It's a complete disaster. Suddenly, the fork wasn't some silly fancy toy. It was the only tool that could do the job. It was the perfect solution to the pasta problem. It became common in Italy by the 14th century. This was the fork's big break, and from Italy it would begin its complete takeover of Europe.
The fork's next big move was into France, and it was all because of a 14-year-old influencer. In 1533, Catherine de' Medici, from a super powerful Italian family, married the future king of France. And guess what she brought with her? An entire collection of forks. At first, the French thought it was super weird, but Catherine was the queen, and whatever the royals do, everyone copies. Her using the fork at every royal dinner slowly changed everything. Using a fork went from being pretentious to being a status symbol. If you had a fork, it meant you were rich, cool, and fashionable. The French nobility started using forks to prove they were part of the in crowd. It wasn't an overnight change, though. The famous King Louis XIV, a century later, had amazing sets of forks at his palace, but still preferred to eat with his hands. But Catherine de' Medici had made the fork cool. She turned it from a weird foreign object into a must-have for aristocrats.
This is how the fork won its final battle. It took into the 1800s, but two things changed everything. First, people became obsessed with hygiene. Suddenly, the idea of everyone sticking their dirty hands in the same food bowl was disgusting. The fork went from being an insult to God to a tool for being clean and civilized. Second, the Industrial Revolution kicked in. Factories started pumping out thousands of forks, making them super cheap. You didn't have to be a princess to own one anymore. Everyone could afford a fork. What was once a golden toy for royalty was now in every single home. And just like that, after a nearly 1,000-year war, everything flipped. By the 19th century, if you weren't using a fork, you were the weird one.
Isn't that insane? This normal object you use every single day was once feared as evil, laughed at as unmanly, and fought as a threat to all of society. It took a princess, a plate of pasta, royal influencers, and a complete change in how people thought about germs for the fork to finally win. This story proves that the simplest things have the most unbelievable histories. The resistance was never really about the fork itself. It was about protecting their way of life and fighting against new ideas. The fork is proof that history is way crazier than you could ever imagine.
There are so many objects with secret histories just like this. If there's an everyday item you want me to investigate, tell me in the comments right now. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next crazy story from the Mundane Mystery Files. Thanks for watching.